"I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook." The girl's voice was barely more than a breath, cracked at the edges from thirst and wind. Yet it carried something firmer than pleading, something stubborn, something that had not broken. Not yet. Owen Booker looked at her from the porch where he stood, the last strokes of sunlight casting long shadows over the New Mexico plains. It was late summer, 1879, and the heat of the day still lingered like a tired breath clinging to the skin. The wind stirred red dust into little swirls that danced through the dry grass and wagon ruts, but the air had begun to shift, as if something in it had grown tired of silence. He had been tending to the barn door hinge when he heard the knock just once, just loud enough to be sure it wasn't a mistake. When he turned, he saw her at the edge of his porch, a girl of 19, perhaps 20, thin as the shadow she cast, her boots nearly worn through, her shawl unraveling at the edges like a spider's web caught in wind. In her hands, she cradled a cast-iron pot, blackened from use and fire, held with the kind of grip that spoke not of hunger, but of memory. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, barely upright, holding on to the last thing that had weight in her life. Owen didn't speak. His eyes took her in the chapped lines of her lips, the tremble in her knees that didn't quite give out, the way her blistered fingers clung to that pot like it was something holy. "Name?" he asked at last, his voice low. "Al," she said, soft as a lullaby nearly forgotten. He looked past her down the trail. No wagon, no mule, nothing but dust and the dying sun. "You got folks?" She gave a single shake of her head. He lowered his gaze again to her hands, bare, blistered, clinging to that pot like it was her last piece of tether to something kind. And for a long while, the only sounds were the groan of the wind against old wood and the hush of dirt beneath the porch. Then he stepped aside. "You're hired," he said, and after a beat, "Something more, and you're home." The girl Ellie didn't collapse. Her shoulders dropped, but it wasn't defeat. It was the weary relief of someone who had carried a burden too far. She stepped forward with the quiet shuffle of worn soles on wood. He didn't reach for her, didn't ask more. She walked past him like someone entering a place both foreign and long dreamed of, her eyes flicking from corner to corner, door to door, as if memorizing the layout of a fragile mercy. Inside, the house was clean but distant, like a photograph pressed in the pages of a book no one opened anymore. A rusted kettle sat on the back of the stove. The hearth had been swept, but not recently used. There were no flowers, no cloths, no softness, only function. She paused in the hallway, turning slightly. "Where should I sleep?" Owen gestured down the narrow hall. "Back room. There's a cot. Sheets are clean. Water's in the basin. Tomorrow, we talk chores. Tonight, you eat." She nodded, one small movement, and vanished down the hallway without another word. He stood alone on the porch a while longer, the sun now a faint red cut against the western hills. The wind had settled, the dry fields stretched out before him to cows, a half-collapsed chicken coop, fences in need of mending, and a silence that had lasted far too many winters. When he turned and shut the door behind him, he left the lock, untouched for the first time in years. Ellie had always remembered the scent of bread from childhood, not just the smell, but the feeling of it, thick and warm, rising through the cracks of a wooden floor before dawn. Her father, George May, baked for Millstone Bakery, hands dusted in flour and marked by heat. Her mother, Lillian, stitched aprons and hummed lullabies in a language Ellie never knew the name of, only the sound of. They had been poor, but they had been a family, until the winter of '74, when her mother's cough went red, and the doctor's eyes turned soft with apologies. Ellie had been 14 when she buried her mother beneath a wooden cross, carved from her father's old bread paddle. George took a second job in the coal mine after that, debts from medicine weighing on his back. 2 years later, the mine collapsed. They found part of him but never the legs. At 16, Ellie was alone. She tried to keep the bakery going. She knew how to knead, to rise the dough by smell alone. But the law in that town wasn't kind to a girl without a man's name on the deed. Cyrus Elwood, the landlord, let her stay a while until he began locking the back door and standing to close. One night, she left with a bruise beneath her collar and her mother's pot clutched to her chest. She walked east, toward Hayden's Fork, thinking maybe the church would help. But the Reverend's wife tightened her grip on the Bible when Ellie approached. A boy shouted from the general store porch, "Ain't no husband chassin' that one," she begged. Without words, offering the pot like an offering, another town let her wash dishes. On the third night, the innkeeper came through her door without knocking. She broke his nose with a ladle and ran before dawn. 3 towns, for nights, snow in her sleeves, blisters on her feet. She slept behind forges, in wagons, in barns that stank of rot and mice. And when she saw the ranch at the edge of nowhere, something inside her nearly collapsed from the idea of stopping. She leaned against the fence, pot in one hand, the other pulling her shawl across her ribs. "I don't want your pity," she whispered to no one, "just your fire." Then everything tilted. The dirt hit her cheek. A voice gruff, distant. "Someone get water." She didn't wake to sun. She woke to warmth. A wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar, oats boiling. On the stove, stone walls. A hand rough, steady placing her pot gently by the hearth, not like it was some dirty thing, but like it mattered. He hadn't taken it. That was how she knew she hadn't been robbed, only rescued. Still, her hand stayed on that handle long. Into the night Owen opened a door to a small room, letting dust and memory spill through. "You can stay here," he said, not meeting her gaze. His voice was calm, but the way he hesitated at the threshold said this room held weight. She stepped inside barefoot, floorboards cool against her skin. A faint trace of lavender still clung to the air like something that refused to be forgotten. A bed neatly made, a quilt drawn tight, a lace doily yellowed by time. On the shelf, a cracked mirror, a wooden brush, a pair of embroidered gloves, stiff with years. This was hers, Ellie said, voice small. Owen nodded, jaw tight. "Clara." Fever took her. Spring of '74. "I'll keep it clean," Ellie whispered. "I promise." He didn't reply, just turned and left her alone in a room that still breathed with a woman's absence. She stood in the quiet, fingers brushing the edge of a dresser, careful not to disturb the dust. At the window, she drew the curtain back just enough for a sliver of moonlight to touch the floor. She folded her blanket on the chair and sat gently on the bed's edge, unsure if she belonged, but grateful not to be outside in the morning. She opened the door to find a bundle of kindling and 2 eggs. Waiting on the bench, no note, just left there like a gesture from someone who didn't know how to say welcome. She stepped into the kitchen and paused. It was colder than expected. The hearth was dead. Cobwebs clung to beams. A thick coat of ash blanketed the stovetop. Pans hung rusted, like tired old hands that once held life and now sagged with waiting. She moved slowly, tracing knife marks in the wood, finding a forgotten tin of herbs on a high shelf. Someone had loved this kitchen once. She rolled up her sleeves, tied her hair back, and scrubbed. The counters, the stove, the smell of soap and dust filled the air. She cracked the eggs into a chipped blue bowl she'd found, her hands shaking, but her rhythm returning. She chopped onions fine, salted with care, and let the fire rise from ash. She cooked. When she reached to rehang a sun-bleached curtain, a slip of light revealed something tucked between books, a photograph. Worn and bent, a woman with soft eyes, a boy smiling shyly. "Clara." "Their son." Ellie bowed her head. "I'll take good care of it," she whispered. She didn't know if she meant the house, the memory, or the quiet that lingered. Later, the floor creaked. Owen stood in the doorway, sniffing the air. "You used the thyme," he said. Ellie wiped flour from her hands. It was still good. Clara liked thyme in her eggs. "Then I'll keep using it." He said nothing more, just turned and left, his boots softer now on the porch. That night, the kindling was stacked higher. She stirred the stew longer. The wind softened outside. Inside, something else rose, a warmth not born from flame alone. She ladled soup into a ceramic bowl, once Clara's, placed a square of cornbread beside it. The broth shimmered in the lantern glow, laced with carrot, potato, rosemary, her mother's memory in every stir. Owen sat across the table, watched, listened. "It's nothing fancy," she said. He ate in silence, half the bowl, then set his spoon down. "Cornbread holds together," he said. "Mama's trick, cornmeal and lard." No eggs when the hens stopped laying. He pushed the bowl slightly toward her. Good soup. She nodded. Thank you. He rose and stepped outside. Later, she found him standing by the window, his silhouette caught between firelight and starlight. She paused in the doorway, watching him watch the kitchen, the pot still on the stove, the scent of thyme clinging to the air. He hadn't seen her, but she saw everything. She whispered, barely louder than the fire's hiss, "You can trust the small things, Owen. Just the small things." Behind her, the fire did not fade. It glowed. It held. That night, the stars stitched the sky with quiet light, and the wind curled soft around the porch like a dog coming home. Ellie sat on the top step, shawl wrapped tight, knees hugged to her chest. Owen sat beside her, boots planted firm, hat low. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was a deep, full silence, the kind that filled space like a warm blanket, heavy but comforting. They sat with it for a while, neither needing to speak, until Ellie's voice broke through, soft as linen. "My mama once burned a whole tray of biscuits," she said. "Left Emin too long, telling me how Papa asked her to marry him." Owen didn't look at her, just kept his gaze steady on the darkening sky. She went on, her voice barely more than a murmur. "We didn't have much that day," she cried, cursed herself something fierce. "But Papa took one, said, 'Burned love's still love if it's warm,' and ate the whole thing." I laughed so hard I near choked. Then Mama laughed, too. She always got mad at herself more than anyone else ever could. At that, the corner of Owen's mouth tugged. Then came a quiet chuckle, small, short, real. Ellie turned her head slightly, stealing a glance at him. In the soft starlight, his face seemed gentler somehow, the hard edges softened by shadows. She didn't say anything else. She let the quiet settle again. Warmer this time, a kind of peace that didn't ask for words. When the night had deepened and they rose to head inside, Owen paused by the door. His voice came low. "I'll fix the dining table tomorrow." Ellie blinked. "Why?" He gave a small shrug. "Eyes not meeting hers. You need more space to roll dough. That sideboard's too narrow." Something in her chest caught. "Thank you," she whispered. At dawn, before the rooster even stirred, she found him there in the dining room, sleeves rolled, sandpaper in hand, carefully working the edge of the long oak table. The wood had warped over the years, bent by heat, water, time. He smoothed it with a craftsman's patience, quiet and focused. She stood in the doorway, her apron in her hand. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. "Still sanding," he replied. "You don't ask for much. Just seems right." That afternoon, she baked again. Sweet rolls this time, golden and light, brushed with warm honey. When she handed one to him, he took it without a word, bitten slowly. But when he looked at her, just for a second, something flickered behind his eyes, not loud or sudden, just a shifted, like a door cracked open in a quiet room. A week later, she found a new rolling pin on the shelf, not store-bought, hand-carved from oak. The grain smooth beneath her fingertips, it fit her grip perfectly. There was no note, no mention of it, but she knew. That morning, she whispered into the flour, "Some men love louder without words." And the dough rose just fine. One dry, aching day, Ellie spent the morning kneading bread and the afternoon hanging linens across the fence. The wind tugged at them like restless hands, and though the sky was still blue, she could feel a storm brewing. By sundown, she was dusting flour from her apron when a knock came, not on the front door, but at the side gate. 3 slow raps on the wooden post. Then stillness. Owen was still out, checking the irrigation ditch. Her heart stuttered. A man stood at the gate, tall, lean, with a crooked grin. That meant no kindness. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Ain't this a surprise?" Ellie froze. His name was Silas. He'd lived 2 rooms down from her once, back in a place she ran from. He'd never touched her, not quite, but his looks lingered too long, his words too slick, too sour. He'd offered things she never wanted, turned cruel when she refused, saw the chimney smoke. He said, stepping in a little closer, "Didn't expect to see you." She said nothing. He let his eyes wander over the porch, the yard, her clean dress. "Thought you was gone for good," he said, voice oozing familiarity. "You still cookin'? I remember that stew you made for the widow. Smelled like Sunday supper." He leaned in. "Funny, you never said goodbye." She stepped back, rag clenched in her hand, and then she heard bootsteps. Steady, certain. Owen. He came up from behind her, damp shirt clinging to his back, a glove half off. He didn't say a word at first, just stood beside her. Then he placed his hand on her shoulder. Gentle, steady, it said everything. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, firm. "She's not going anywhere," he said. "She works here. She belongs here." Silas blinked. Charm. Crumbling. Didn't mean nothing by it. He muttered. "Just passing through." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, Miss Ellie." And he turned, boots kicking up dust. Ellie stood frozen, breath caught in her chest. Owen said nothing more. He didn't grip her tighter, just let his hand rest for a moment longer, then stepped back. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "A good cook deserves a safe kitchen." But his eyes, they said more. That night, Ellie stood by the window watching the hills, unsure if Silas had gone for good. The next morning, a fresh horseshoe hung above the back door. No words, but she knew Owen had placed it there. She touched the iron curve and went to stoke the fire. For the first time, someone had stood up for her, not for gain or pride but simply because she mattered, and that changed everything. The sun climbed slowly over the kitchen windowsill, casting gold across the floor. Ellie stood barefoot by the counter, sleeves rolled, hands dusted in flour. The dough was ready, rich with butter and buttermilk. The old tin cutter waited. Behind her, Owen hovered by the doorway, arms crossed. "You said you never learned to bake," she said without turning. "I didn't," he admitted. "Burned more than I ever browned." She smiled. "Then today, we fixed that." He pulled a chair beside her, unsure. She showed him cut, press, fold, "Don't overwork it," she said gently. "Butter's gotta stay cold." He tried. His hands were big, clumsy. One biscuit came out lopsided, another paper thin. She laughed, light and real. "That one looks like Kansas after a flood." He chuckled too, "Still better than the last." "Progress," she said. As the biscuits baked, the kitchen warmed. With the scent of something rich and promising, they sat side by side, talking about old aprons and stubborn horses. When the biscuits came out, Owen burned his fingers reaching too soon. "Told you," she teased. He blew on it, took a bite and paused. "It's good," he said, surprised. "Of course it is," she mock-scolded. "What do you think I've been feeding you?" He chewed another moment. "This one's different." "How?" "Tastes like something new, like a beginning." She blushed, fingers brushing the counter. The next morning, she expected eggs or preserves waiting on the table but instead found a bundle tied with twine. Wildflowers, clover, sage, 2 daisies. Something purple she didn't know. No note. Owen came in, washed his hands, nodded toward the flowers. "For the kitchen," he said. "Smells like life again." She touched the petals. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that day, while kneading dough, Ellie caught herself humming an old tune her mother once sang when she thought no one was listening. The memory rose like yeast, unexpected and soft. That evening, they sat on the porch. She asked, quiet, "You ever think about what it means to stay?" He tilted his head. "I've met a lot of folks who run from places, from loss, from themselves. But this place feels like staying isn't the same as being stuck." He looked at her. "I've been stuck before. This don't feel like that." She smiled slow. "No, it don't. No declarations, no promises. Just the quiet of two people learning to belong." Spring returned in colors, wildflowers first, then soft green grass. The ranch, once lonely, now moved with life. Fences held, soil turned. Biscuits rose. The kitchen was no longer just a place to eat. It breathed. Ellie stood by the window one morning, watching Owen hammer a new beam into the porch. Sweat darkened his shirt. She smiled until her eyes drifted to a letter on the table. An offer. The mayor's wife had tasted her peach cobbler and offered her a storefront in town. Her own kitchen, her own name. That night, she baked one last sourdough, sat beside Owen, placed the loaf between them. "I was thinking I might go," she said. "There's a stove. Real customers." He nodded. You should, if your heart's leaning there. It's not about heart, she said. It's about not missing what could be mine. He stood and left without a word. The bread stayed untouched. At sunrise, Owen was in the barn when footsteps approached. I made it to the edge of town, Ellie said behind him. He turned. She stood in her apron, a warm loaf under her arm, no travel sack in sight. But when I saw the sun hit that ridge, I couldn't go. I'm not leaving. Not unless you fire me. He reached into his pocket, unwrapped a small cloth. Inside, a silver ring. Simple, worn, but whole. He placed it in her flour-dusted palm. Then you're not just hired, he said. You're home. Ellie's eyes blurred. Hope you like biscuits every day. He smiled. As long as they come with you. The sun climbed higher, brushing light across the porch, the fields, the kitchen window with its patchwork curtains. Inside, 2 mugs of coffee waited. A single wildflower stood in a mason jar. No candlelight, no ceremony, just a warm loaf, a silver ring, and the quiet truth of 2 hearts choosing each other. Out here, where words are few, love speaks softest but truest by the firelight.